Imagine being the most respected xenobiologist in the galaxy, having studied thousands of species across countless worlds. You've seen creatures that can survive in the vacuum of space, beings that feed on radiation, and organisms that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You thought you had seen it all. Then, you encounter humanity, a species so impossibly, terrifyingly resilient that their very existence challenges everything you believed about life itself. Dr. HFY had dedicated her life to understanding the biological limits of existence. In her 3 centuries of research, she had catalogued the most extreme life forms the galaxy had to offer. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the day a human walked into her medical bay, bleeding, broken, and somehow still standing. What she discovered in that examination would shake the foundations of galactic medicine and reveal a truth so disturbing that it would change how every species in the universe viewed these strange creatures called humans. This is the story of that discovery. This is the story of why the galaxy learned to fear not humanity's weapons, but their biology itself. Dr. HFY's forearms moved with practiced precision as she organized her medical instruments for the morning shift aboard the Galactic medical station Harmony. Her pale blue skin shimmered under the artificial lighting, and her large black eyes reflected the sterile environment she had called home for the past 30 years. As the station's chief xenobiologist, she had seen species from every corner of the galaxy, but today would bring something entirely unprecedented. The medical bay's doors slid open with their familiar hiss, and her assistant, Nurse Krill, scuttled in on 6 legs, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Doctor, we have an unusual situation developing in Bay 7, he chittered in the common tongue. A new species has requested medical assistance, but their biology is concerning." HFY paused in her preparations, 2 of her hands still sorting surgical tools while the other 2 accessed her datapad. "Concerning how? Have you run the standard biological scans?" Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with the most exotic ailments across known space. "That's just it, Doctor." Krill's antennae twitched anxiously. "The scans are showing readings that don't make sense. The creature claims to be from a species called humans from a planet they call Earth. But, Doctor, the biological data suggests this being should be dead." Intrigued despite herself, HFY set down her instruments and followed Krill through the winding corridors of the medical station. As they walked, she accessed the preliminary scan data on her pad, her large eyes widening with each metric she reviewed. The readings were indeed impossible. Blood pressure that should have caused immediate cardiac failure, bone density that defied physics for a bipedal creature, and, most disturbing of all, evidence of multiple traumatic injuries that had somehow healed without proper medical intervention. "Has the creature shown any signs of aggression?" she asked as they approached Bay 7. "None whatsoever, Doctor. In fact, it seems almost apologetic about seeking treatment. It keeps insisting that its injuries are minor despite obvious evidence to the contrary." They stopped outside Bay 7, and, through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, HFY got her first look at a human being. The creature stood roughly 2 meters tall, covered in what appeared to be synthetic materials that served as some form of protection. Its skin was a warm brown color, and its face bore what her cultural training recognized as an expression of mild discomfort. What struck her immediately was how ordinary it looked despite the impossible readings on her instruments. "Fascinating," she murmured, studying the being more closely. "Run a full-spectrum analysis. I want to know everything about this creature's biology before we proceed." The human seemed to sense their presence and turned toward the viewing panel. When it saw them, it raised one appendage in what HFY's xenocultural database suggested was a greeting gesture among its species. The simplicity of the action belied the complexity of what her scanners were telling her about the being's internal structure. Entering the bay, HFY approached carefully, her translator automatically adjusting to the human's language patterns. "Greetings. I am Dr. HFY, chief xenobiologist of this station. I understand you require medical assistance." The human's features shifted into what her database identified as a smile, though the expression seemed forced. "Thank you, Doctor. I'm Lieutenant Marcus Chen of the Earth Exploration Corps. I've been traveling for several months, and I'm afraid I've picked up a few injuries along the way. Nothing serious, but I thought it might be wise to get checked out." Nothing serious. HFY glanced at her instruments again, confirming what she had seen in the preliminary scans. This being was walking and talking normally despite having what appeared to be 3 partially healed fractures in its skeletal structure, evidence of significant blood loss that should have required immediate transfusion, and signs of exposure to radiation levels that would have killed most species instantly. Lieutenant Chen, would you mind if I conducted a thorough examination? Your species is new to our database, and I want to ensure we provide you with appropriate care. She kept her voice professional, though internally her scientific curiosity was racing. Of course, Doctor. Whatever you need to do. As Chen settled onto the examination platform, HFY began her work with methodical precision. She started with basic vital signs, and immediately had to recalibrate her equipment 3 times. The human's heart was beating at a rate that suggested extreme physical stress, yet the being appeared completely relaxed. Its breathing pattern indicated someone who had recently engaged in significant physical exertion, but there were no external signs of such activity. Lieutenant, have you been engaged in any strenuous activity recently? She asked while her instruments continued their analysis. Chen actually chuckled, a sound that her translator rendered as indicating amusement. Not really, Doctor. Just the usual travel stuff. Had to do some repairs on my ship's exterior yesterday, spent about 6 hours in a radiation field fixing the hull. Pretty routine maintenance. HFY's 4 hands froze. You spent 6 hours in a radiation field? Without protection. Oh no, I had protection. Standard environmental suit, rated for moderate radiation exposure. Chen seemed genuinely confused by her reaction. Is that a problem? The readings on her instruments showed radiation exposure levels that would have required immediate emergency treatment for any species in her database. Yet this human spoke of it as casual maintenance work. She continued her examination, documenting each impossible finding with growing amazement and mounting concern. The bone density scans revealed a skeletal structure that seemed designed for a much higher gravity environment than the station's standard setting. Chen's bones were dense enough to serve as natural armor, yet flexible enough to allow for remarkable mobility. When she tested his reflexes, his response time was faster than her equipment could accurately measure. Tell me about your home planet, Lieutenant. What are the environmental conditions like on Earth? She tried to keep her voice casual while her instruments revealed increasingly disturbing data. Earth's pretty standard, I think. Gravity's about 1 g. Atmosphere is roughly 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen. We've got temperature ranges from about -40 to +50 Celsius in habitable zones. Pretty comfortable, really. Standard. HFY's species evolved on a world with half that gravity and struggled to survive in temperature variations of more than 20 degrees. Yet this human described conditions that would challenge most known life forms as comfortable. As she continued her examination, she discovered evidence of the human's immune system that defied everything she knew about biological defense mechanisms. Chen's blood contained antibodies for diseases that hadn't existed in her databases, suggesting exposure to pathogens that should have been fatal. More disturbing still, his cellular regeneration rate was approximately 3 times faster than what she considered theoretically possible. Lieutenant, I need to ask you some questions about injuries you've sustained in the past. Our scans indicate several instances of significant trauma that have healed remarkably well. Chen's expression grew slightly embarrassed. Well, there was that incident with the plasma conduit explosion last year. Caught some shrapnel, had some burns. And I broke my arm pretty badly during the Kepler mission when our gravity generator failed and I hit the bulkhead. Oh, and there was food poisoning from that trading post on Rigel 7 that laid me up for a few days. Each incident he described so casually would have been fatal for most species. Plasma burns alone required months of intensive care, assuming survival. Yet Chen spoke of them as minor inconveniences that had healed with what appeared to be basic medical care. How long did these injuries take to heal? She asked, already dreading the answer. The arm took about 8 weeks to get back to full strength. The burns cleared up in a month or so. The food poisoning was the worst part, honestly. I was pretty sick for about a week. Chen paused, studying her expression.
Doctor, is something wrong? You look concerned.
HFY realized her translator was probably conveying her growing alarm through her body language. She made an effort to compose herself, though her scientific mind was racing with the implications of what she was discovering. This wasn't just a resilient species, this was a form of life that seemed to operate by entirely different biological rules.
Lieutenant, I'm going to need to run some additional tests. Nothing invasive, but I want to get a complete picture of your physiology. Would you be willing to participate in some physical assessments?
Sure, doctor. Whatever helps your research.
Over the next several hours, HFY put Chen through a battery of tests that would have challenged trained athletes from the most physically capable species in the galaxy.
The human completed each assessment not just successfully, but with ease that suggested he was operating well below his maximum capabilities. When she tested his visual acuity, she discovered he could see clearly in light levels that her own species found barely adequate for navigation.
His hearing range covered frequencies that overlapped with her equipment's sensor capabilities.
Most remarkably, when she tested his pain tolerance using standard medical procedures, Chen barely reacted to stimuli that would have caused unconsciousness in most beings.
Doctor, Chen said during a brief break between tests, I hope I'm not causing any problems.
I know humans are pretty new to this part of space, and I don't want to be a diplomatic incident or anything. The casual way he mentioned potentially causing a diplomatic incident struck HFY as profoundly human. Here was a being whose mere existence challenged fundamental assumptions about life itself, worried about being impolite. She found herself genuinely liking the strange creature, which only made her growing concerns more troubling.
Not at all, Lieutenant.
Your cooperation is invaluable for our research. She paused, considering how to phrase her next question.
Can you tell me about your species' history? How long have humans existed as a sentient species?
Well, modern humans have been around for about 300,000 years, give or take.
We've had what you might call civilization for maybe 12,000 years.
We only achieved spaceflight about 2 centuries ago. Chen spoke with the same casual tone he had used to describe his injuries.
300,000 years.
Most species in the galactic community had achieved sentience and spaceflight within a few thousand years of developing complex brains.
Humans had spent nearly 300 millennia developing on their world before reaching the stars. The implications were staggering.
As the day progressed and her tests continued, HFY began to understand that she wasn't just examining an unusual alien species. She was documenting the biology of what might be the most terrifyingly resilient life form the galaxy had ever encountered. These humans had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to conditions that would challenge most species' survival equipment. When she finally completed her preliminary examination, Chen stood and stretched with movements that reminded her of a predator despite his friendly demeanor.
How did I do, Doctor? Everything check out okay?
HFY looked at her datapad, filled with readings that would require her to completely revise several textbooks on xenobiology.
Lieutenant Chen, you are in perfect health by your species standards.
In fact, you appear to be operating at optimal efficiency despite what most species would consider severe environmental stress.
That's good to hear.
I was a little worried about that radiation exposure, but it sounds like everything's fine.
Chen gathered his equipment with efficient movements. Is there anything else you need from me?
Actually, yes. I would very much like to study your species' medical database, if such records exist. Your biology is unlike anything we've encountered, and understanding human physiology could benefit the entire galactic medical community.
Chen's expression shifted to one of genuine enthusiasm.
I'd be happy to help, Doctor. Human medical knowledge isn't exactly classified, and we're always interested in sharing information with other species. I can have our databases transmitted to your station within a few days.
As Chen prepared to leave, HFY realized that this encounter would change everything she thought she knew about the limits of biological possibility.
The casual way this human discussed surviving radiation exposure, recovering from injuries that should have been fatal, and thriving in conditions that challenged most species' technology suggested that humanity represented something entirely new in the galaxy. Lieutenant, she called as he reached the bay doors.
Thank you for your cooperation. This has been illuminating. Chen turned back with that same friendly smile. Anytime, Doctor. And, thanks for the checkup. It's nice to know there are good medical facilities out here in space.
After he left, HFY stood alone in the examination bay, staring at her datapad filled with impossible readings.
She had thought she understood the biological limits of life in the universe.
Now she realized that somewhere in the galaxy, an entire species existed that redefined what was possible for living beings to endure and survive.
The real question wasn't what humans were capable of surviving.
The question was what had shaped them into beings capable of such extraordinary resilience. And, perhaps more importantly, what that meant for every other species in the galaxy who might one day find themselves in conflict with these impossibly durable creatures called humans. 3 days after Lieutenant Chen's visit, HFY found herself staring at the largest data transmission she had ever received. The human medical database hadn't just arrived, it had practically overwhelmed her station's storage systems with its sheer volume. As she began to process the information, she quickly realized why the database was so extensive. Human medicine wasn't just about treating illness, it was about documenting an ongoing war between the species and, seemingly, everything that could possibly harm a living being. She started with what humans called their basic medical references, expecting to find information similar to other species' fundamental health data. Instead, she discovered documentation for thousands of diseases, injuries, and medical conditions that would have been extinction events for most civilizations. The humans had not only survived these threats but had developed treatments, cures, and preventive measures for each one. The first section that caught her attention was labeled infectious diseases. Her four hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through entry after entry describing pathogens that had killed millions of humans throughout their history. What horrified her wasn't the death toll, it was that humans had survived these plagues as a species and had grown stronger because of them. Nurse Krill entered her office as she was deep in the database, his mandibles clicking with concern.
Doctor, you've been studying those human files for 18 hours straight. Perhaps you should rest?
Krill, look at this, she gestured to her display screen with two hands while the other two continued scrolling through data.
This entry describes something humans call smallpox.
According to their records, this single disease killed over 300 million humans across several centuries. That's terrible, Doctor, but many species have faced devastating plagues. You don't understand, HFY's voice carried a note of awe mixed with horror.
They didn't just survive it.
They eliminated it entirely.
Look here, the last case was recorded over 200 years ago.
They developed something called vaccination that made their entire species immune to a disease that had killed hundreds of millions of their ancestors. Krill moved closer to examine the data, his compound eyes widening as he processed the information.
They deliberately exposed themselves to weakened versions of the disease to build immunity? That's insane.
That's not even the remarkable part, HFY continued, pulling up another file.
Look at this list of diseases they've completely eradicated or controlled.
Polio, measles, tetanus, diphtheria, dozens of others that would have wiped out entire planetary populations of most species.
Humans turned biological warfare against pathogens into routine medical care for their children.
As she delved deeper into the database, the scope of human medical knowledge became increasingly disturbing. She found records of humans surviving injuries that defied physics, recovering from illnesses that should have been instantly fatal, and adapting to environmental conditions that would challenge the most advanced life support systems.
The section on trauma medicine was particularly revealing. Humans had developed surgical techniques for repairing damage that other species would consider irreversible.
They could replace organs, reattach severed limbs, and even perform procedures on their own brains while remaining conscious. The casualness with which these procedures were described suggested they were routine rather than desperate measures.
Doctor, Krill said quietly, I'm beginning to understand why that human seemed so unconcerned about his injuries. If these medical records are accurate, what he described would barely qualify as requiring treatment by human standards. HFY opened a file labeled Emergency Medicine and immediately regretted it.
The images and descriptions contained within showed humans surviving trauma that would have reduced most species to component atoms. burns covering significant percentages of their bodies, blood loss that should have caused immediate death, exposure to toxins that were used as industrial solvents by other species. One case study particularly caught her attention. A human construction worker had fallen from a significant height, suffering what the report described as multiple compound fractures, severe internal bleeding, and traumatic brain injury. The victim had remained conscious during the entire rescue operation, apologizing to the medical team for causing trouble. He had recovered completely within 6 months and had returned to the same type of work that had nearly killed him. "Krill, I need you to run a simulation," she said, her voice carrying growing urgency. "Take the average trauma case from this human database and model what would happen if a member of any known species suffered equivalent injuries." Her assistant's legs clicked nervously against the floor as he accessed the station's medical modeling systems. After several minutes of processing, the results appeared on her screen. The simulation was unequivocal. Every single species in the galactic community would have suffered complete biological failure within minutes of sustaining injuries that humans routinely survived and recovered from. But the trauma records were nothing compared to what she found in the section labeled Occupational Health and Safety. Here was documentation of humans deliberately exposing themselves to environments and conditions that most species would use as methods of execution. Deep-sea diving at pressures that would crush conventional life forms, working in temperatures that fluctuated beyond the operational range of most starships, exposure to radiation levels that would sterilize entire planets. She found records of humans called astronauts who had spent months in the vacuum of space with nothing but thin layers of artificial protection. Others called deep-sea researchers who worked at ocean depths where the pressure alone would compress most known life forms into microscopic particles. Most disturbing of all were the disaster response teams who routinely entered environments contaminated with toxins, radiation, and structural hazards to rescue other humans. Dr. Krill said, studying the occupational safety data, these humans appear to thrive in conditions that we use to test the durability of our space station hull materials. The more she read, the more HFY began to understand that Lieutenant Chen hadn't been unusual for his species. If anything, he represented the baseline of human durability. The database contained references to individuals who had survived injuries and exposures that made Chen's experience look minor by comparison. She found medical records of humans who had survived direct lightning strikes multiple times. Others who had recovered from complete cardiac arrest lasting several minutes. Some had even survived being frozen solid in ice for extended periods, with their biological functions resuming normal operation once they were warmed and revived. The section on human immune systems revealed perhaps the most disturbing information of all. Humans didn't just fight off diseases, they incorporated the experience into their biological memory and became stronger. Their immune systems were essentially learning computers that adapted to new threats with terrifying efficiency. "Look at this, Krill," she highlighted a passage about human immune response. When exposed to new pathogens, human immune systems don't just develop antibodies. They create biological memory cells that remain active for decades, sometimes for the human's entire lifespan. They turn every disease exposure into permanent biological armor. That explains how they survived those historical plagues, Krill observed. Each generation became more resistant than the last. But, perhaps most unsettling of all was the section on human psychology and stress response. The database revealed that humans had evolved mental resilience to match their physical durability. They could remain functional under psychological pressures that would cause complete mental breakdown in most species. She read accounts of humans maintaining complex decision-making capabilities while under direct mortal threat, coordinating rescue operations while injured themselves, and even retaining their sense of humor in situations that would induce catatonic terror in most beings. The psychological profiles suggested that humans actually performed better under moderate stress, as if their minds were optimized for crisis management. The database also contained extensive information about human child-rearing practices, and this section proved almost as disturbing as their medical records. Human offspring, called children, were regularly exposed to controlled dangers as part of their development. They played games that involved calculated physical risk, learned to navigate environmental hazards as routine education, and were encouraged to develop resilience through managed adversity. They train their young to be resilient, HFY murmured as she read through child development studies.
Other species protect their offspring until they're fully mature. Humans deliberately expose their children to challenges that strengthen them. The implications were staggering. Not only were humans individually capable of surviving extraordinary threats, but their entire species was systematically optimized for resilience from birth. Every human was essentially a survivor of a comprehensive training program that would kill most adult members of other species. As the hours passed, HFY found herself developing a completely new perspective on the casual human she had examined days earlier. Lieutenant Chen hadn't been impressive despite being human, he had been impressive because he was human. His species had spent hundreds of thousands of years becoming the most durable form of intelligent life the galaxy had ever seen. The database also revealed something else equally disturbing: humans seemed largely unaware of how extraordinary their capabilities were. Their medical literature treated survival of catastrophic injuries as routine clinical cases. Their safety protocols were designed around the assumption that exposure to lethal conditions was an occupational hazard to be managed rather than avoided. She found references to human recreational activities that involved deliberately seeking out dangerous environments for entertainment. They climbed mountains in conditions that would freeze most species solid, explored underwater caves that would crush conventional lifeforms, and engaged in competitive sports that involved intentionally colliding with each other at high velocities. Dr. Krill said, his voice filled with growing alarm, "I've been analyzing the human database alongside our records of other species. If these humans ever became aggressive, most galactic civilizations would be unable to mount any effective resistance." The thought had occurred to HFY as well. Every species in the galactic community had achieved space travel by developing advanced technology to overcome their biological limitations. Humans had achieved space travel while being naturally adapted to conditions that challenged everyone else's technology. She opened another section labeled Military Medicine and immediately understood Krill's concern. Human warfare wasn't just about weapons and tactics, it was about beings capable of continuing to fight under conditions that would incapacitate other species. Their soldiers could operate in environments that would require full life support systems for other species' military forces. The medical records showed human warriors continuing to function effectively despite injuries that would require immediate evacuation for any other species. They had developed battlefield medical techniques that could keep severely wounded humans operational long enough to complete their missions. But, perhaps most revealing was the section on human space exploration. The database showed that humans had begun exploring their solar system using technology that barely qualified as adequate for interplanetary travel. They had routinely accepted risks that other species would consider suicidal, viewing catastrophic system failures and life-threatening equipment malfunctions as acceptable hazards of exploration. They didn't wait until they had safe, reliable space technology, HFY realized as she reviewed early human space missions. They started exploring space as soon as they had anything that could get them off their planet's surface. Most of their early space travelers had a significant probability of death, and they volunteered anyway. As she neared the end of the database, HFY found herself confronting an uncomfortable truth. Humans weren't just another species joining the galactic community. They were a form of life so fundamentally different from everything else that their mere existence changed the rules of what was possible for living beings. The final section of the database contained projections for human medical advancement. Their researchers were working on technologies that would enhance their already extraordinary capabilities. They were developing ways to regenerate damaged organs, extend their functional lifespans, and adapt to even more extreme environments. "Krill, I need you to prepare a report for the Galactic Medical Council," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of her discoveries. "This database contains information that will revolutionize our understanding of biological possibilities. But, more than that, it reveals the existence of a species that may be the most resilient lifeform in known space." "What should the report emphasize, Doctor?" HFY looked at her screens full of impossible medical data, thinking of the friendly human who had casually described surviving radiation exposure as routine maintenance work. "Emphasize that humanity represents a new category of biological entity. They're not just another intelligent species, they're intelligent life optimized for survival under conditions that challenge our most advanced technology." As she began composing her report, HFY realized that the galaxy was about to learn something that would change interspecies relationships forever.
Humans weren't joining the galactic community as equals, they were joining as being so durable that the very concept of what constituted a survivable environment would need to be redefined around their capabilities. The Galactic Medical Council chamber had never seen such attendance for a routine xenobiology presentation. Representatives from every major species in the galactic community filled the amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, electronic tones, and telepathic harmonics that the universal translators struggled to process. Dr. HFY stood at the central podium, her forearms steady despite the weight of what she was about to reveal to the galaxy. Council Chairman VYXX, a crystalline being whose form shifted with his emotions, resonated a tone of formal attention. Dr. HFY, your request for an emergency session regarding a new species has generated considerable interest throughout the scientific community.
Please proceed with your presentation.
Honored council members, HFY began, her voice amplified throughout the chamber. 3 weeks ago, I encountered a representative of a species calling itself human from a planet designated Earth. What I discovered during my examination and subsequent research has forced me to completely reconsider our understanding of the biological limits of intelligent life. She activated her presentation system, and the first image appeared on the chamber's massive display screens: Lieutenant Chen's biological scan data. A collective sound of disbelief rippled through the assembly as the various species processed readings that seemed to violate basic laws of biology. These are the vital statistics of a human male in what his species considers perfect health, HFY continued. As you can see, every measurement exceeds what we would consider survivable parameters for known intelligent life. But this is merely the beginning of what makes humanity unprecedented in our understanding of biology. The Etherian representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, pulsed with rapid light patterns that the translators rendered as urgent curiosity. Dr. HFY, these readings suggest exposure to lethal levels of environmental stress.
How is this being still functional?
That, honored Etherian, is precisely what makes humans so extraordinary, HFY replied, advancing to her next set of data.
Humans don't survive these conditions despite their biology. They survive these conditions because of their biology.
Their entire species has evolved to thrive in environments that would serve as natural execution chambers for most known life forms. The next series of images showed comparative environmental data between Earth and the homeworlds of various galactic species. The gasps, clicks, and harmonic resonances of shock filled the chamber as the assembled beings realized the implications of what they were seeing. Earth's environmental conditions, HFY explained, include temperature variations that span over 100 degrees in their habitable zones, atmospheric pressure fluctuations that would crush some species and cause explosive decompression in others, and gravity levels that would permanently disable most known lifeforms if they were exposed for extended periods.
Dr. Quillian, the renowned Zephyrian biologist whose flowing tentacular form was respected throughout the galaxy, spoke through harmonic vibrations.
Dr. HFY, are you suggesting that humans evolved in conditions that most of us would require advanced environmental suits to survive? I'm suggesting something far more significant than that, HFY responded, pulling up the human medical database statistics. I'm suggesting that humans evolved in conditions so challenging that they developed biological capabilities that exceed our most advanced medical technology. She displayed a comparison chart showing healing rates, immune system efficiency, and trauma recovery statistics. The data revealed that humans could recover from injuries in time frames that other species would require advanced medical intervention to achieve, and they did it using only their natural biological processes.
The Manthari delegate, whose insectoid form was enhanced with technological implants, buzzed with agitation. This data suggests impossibility.
No natural biological system can achieve regeneration rates exceeding technological assistance.
That's what I thought as well,
HFY agreed, until I reviewed their historical medical records. Humans have been surviving injuries and diseases that would constitute extinction events for most species for their entire evolutionary history. They didn't develop advanced medicine to survive, they developed advanced medicine to optimize survival capabilities they already possessed.
She showed the assembly records of human plagues, natural disasters, and environmental catastrophes.
Each event that should have ended human civilization had instead strengthened their biological and cultural resilience.
The chamber fell silent as representatives from hundreds of species processed the implications.
Finally, the collective consciousness of the Harmony Grove spoke through their biomechanical interface. Dr. HFY, if your research is accurate, humans represent a form of life that challenges our fundamental understanding of biological limitations.
But, we must ask, what does this mean for galactic peace and security?
This was the question HFY had been dreading. She activated her final set of data displays, showing human military medicine, space exploration records, and crisis response capabilities.
Honored representatives, humans have been engaging in activities that we would classify as military operations using what they consider routine exploration procedures.
Their space vessels operate with safety margins that we would consider suicidal, yet they view these risks as acceptable hazards of normal travel. The images showed human spacecraft designs that prioritized function over safety, human exploration missions that deliberately sought out dangerous environments, and human military operations that assumed personnel could continue functioning under conditions that would require immediate evacuation for other species. Furthermore, HFY continued, human military medicine is designed around the assumption that their personnel can remain operational despite sustaining injuries that would incapacitate entire units of other species' forces. They don't just treat battlefield injuries, they've developed techniques to keep severely wounded humans functional enough to complete combat missions. The silence in the chamber became oppressive as hundreds of different species contemplated the implications of sharing space with beings who were essentially biological war machines. Counselor Theta 9, speaking through the harmonic resonators of the Machine Collective, processed the data with typical mechanical precision. Dr. HFY, your research suggests that humans are naturally adapted for warfare in environments that would require our most advanced military technology to survive.
This raises concerns about defensive capabilities should humans prove hostile.
That brings me to perhaps the most important aspect of my findings, HFY said, displaying psychological and social data from the human database. Humans have spent hundreds of thousands of years becoming the most resilient life form we've encountered, yet their social development emphasizes cooperation, cultural exchange, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. She showed records of human diplomatic history, their responses to first contact protocols, and their eagerness to share medical and technological knowledge with other species. Lieutenant Chen, the human I examined, volunteered complete access to their species' medical database without any security restrictions. When I explained that our research could benefit the entire galactic community, he expressed enthusiasm about contributing to interspecies cooperation. This pattern appears consistent throughout human culture.
The Aquatic Federation representative, speaking through bioluminescent patterns, raised concerns that resonated through the water-filled section of the chamber.
Dr. HFY, you describe a species of enormous destructive potential that appears to prefer cooperation.
But, what guarantee do we have that this preference will remain stable?
That's where human psychology becomes as remarkable as their physiology, HFY replied, pulling up cognitive resilience data.
Humans have evolved mental toughness to match their physical durability.
But, rather than developing aggressive instincts, they've developed extraordinary capabilities for maintaining social cooperation under extreme stress. She displayed studies of human behavior during natural disasters, technological failures, and resource scarcity. In every case, human societies had responded to existential threats by increasing cooperation and mutual assistance rather than descending into conflict. Their crisis response psychology is remarkable, she explained. Under conditions that would cause social breakdown in most species, humans become more cooperative, more innovative, and more determined to ensure group survival. They've developed cultural mechanisms that channel their extraordinary individual resilience into collective strength.
Dr.
Synthara, the elderly Xenthian philosopher whose crystalline form had observed galactic politics for over a millennium, resonated with deep harmonic wisdom.
Dr. HFY, you present us with a paradox.
A species optimized for survival in impossible conditions, yet committed to cooperation rather than domination.
How do we reconcile this apparent contradiction?
I believe the answer lies in how humans developed their remarkable capabilities, HFY responded.
They didn't evolve in isolation.
Their planet contained numerous species that posed existential threats to early human development. Rather than developing superior weapons or hiding from danger, humans learned to survive by adapting to their environment and cooperating with each other. She displayed data about Earth's diverse ecosystem, showing the numerous predators, environmental hazards, and natural disasters that had shaped human evolution. Humans became resilient not by dominating their environment, but by learning to survive within it. This required developing both individual toughness and group cooperation. They learned that their survival depended not just on personal resilience, but on maintaining social structures that could support individuals during recovery from inevitable injuries and exposures. The assembly processed this information with growing understanding. The most dangerous species they had encountered had also evolved to be the most cooperative, precisely because their dangerous environment required cooperation for survival. Furthermore, HFY continued, human medicine and technology development has always focused on reducing suffering and improving quality of life, even though their natural capabilities would allow them to simply endure conditions that challenge other species. They could survive in environments that would kill most of us, but, instead of accepting that survival, they developed technology to make those environments comfortable. She showed examples of human life support systems, medical treatments, and safety protocols that far exceeded what would be necessary for mere survival, but which reflected a cultural commitment to thriving rather than merely enduring. Council Chairman VYXX's form shifted through several color spectra, indicating deep contemplation. Dr. HFY, your findings suggest that humanity represents both the greatest potential threat and the greatest potential ally our galaxy has encountered. What recommendations do you have for the Council? Honored Chairman, I recommend that we approach humanity not as a threat to be contained, but as a species whose unique capabilities could benefit the entire galactic community. Their medical knowledge could revolutionize treatment for conditions we consider untreatable. Their crisis response capabilities could make them invaluable allies during natural disasters or technological failures. She paused, considering her next words carefully. But, most importantly, I recommend that we remember humans are individuals, not a collective threat. Lieutenant Chen was curious, helpful, and genuinely interested in contributing to galactic cooperation. If his behavior represents typical human attitudes, we have the opportunity to welcome a species whose resilience could strengthen the entire galactic community. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with representatives from every species raising concerns, asking questions, and proposing various approaches to human integration into galactic society. But, as the discussion progressed, a consensus began to emerge. Humans were indeed the most biologically resilient species anyone had encountered, capable of surviving and thriving in conditions that would challenge the most advanced technology of other civilizations. But, they were also a species that had chosen cooperation over domination, healing over harm, and exploration over exploitation. 3 days after the presentation, the Galactic Council issued their official statement regarding humanity. The species known as humans shall be welcomed into the galactic community as full members, with recognition that their unique biological capabilities represent an invaluable resource for all species. Furthermore, the Council establishes the Human Resilience Study Program, to be jointly administered by human and galactic scientists for the benefit of all intelligent life. Dr. HFY received a personal message from Lieutenant Chen shortly after the announcement. His words were simple but carried the same friendly directness she had observed during their first meeting. Dr. HFY, thank you for helping the galaxy understand what humans are about. We're looking forward to working with everyone and learning as much as we can from other species. If you ever need anything for your research, just let us know. We're happy to help. As she read his message, HFY realized that the galaxy had gained something unprecedented, a species so durable they could survive anything, yet so cooperative they chose to use that durability to help others survive as well. In a universe full of wonders, humanity might just be the most wonderful discovery of all. The human medical database remained open to all galactic species, leading to breakthrough treatments for previously incurable conditions. Human crisis response teams became the galaxy's premier emergency responders, saving countless lives during natural disasters and technological failures. And human explorers continued to push the boundaries of known space, surviving in conditions that expanded the galaxy's understanding of where life could thrive. But, perhaps most importantly, the galaxy learned that the most dangerous species could also be the most valuable allies, and that true strength lay not in the ability to inflict harm, but in the capacity to endure hardship while helping others do the same.